And happy Thursday evening to you all. I'm sorry, Wednesday evening. I'm a day ahead of myself. It's Wednesday. You know, my wife loves Wednesdays because she can take advantage of my senior citizen status down at the Goodwill to do some thrift shopping. I remember the day I turned 55, the local cafe coffee shop here in our small town of New Richmond, Wisconsin, said that when you turn 55, you get a senior citizen's discount. And my wife just couldn't wait for me to turn 55 so she could take advantage of my senior citizen discount. So I guess at 58 years old, I am now a fully fledged senior citizen, at least in my small town. And my name is Scotty Roberts. And you're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on Odyssey Radio Network. You can go hear the audio at odysy1.com, odyssey1.com, or come on over to my YouTube channel, which is Mr. Scotty Roberts, Mr. spelled out, and you can see the video and join in the live chat as it airs simultaneously, synchronistically, if that's a word, with the I keep getting messages pop up on my screen. Pardon me for that, folks. And they distract. They jump right in front of me, my eyes. That's the one thing about Apple computers. I'm on an Apple. I've been an Apple guy since 1989 when I was a creative director in an ad shop down in Detroit. And one thing I have noticed is the more advanced technology has become, if you're on an Apple, everything is run by Apple. You can be doing something in a program that has nothing to do with it. Apple forces you to go in and manage this or manage that or add more money to this or more money to that. It's the same way with my iPhone. For years, I coveted an iPhone. And when I finally got one about 3-4 years ago now, that iPhone I have found is a pain in the ass. It always wants me to upgrade. It always wants me to, oh, you're out of storage space. Buy more storage space from Apple. And so I get really tired of that. So I think my new phone is going to be a Samsung or something, some other radiation-emitting thing. And so I know Rocky Stucci, whose show is on just right after this one, 2 hours from now, the Rocky Stucci Situation Room with me, the co-host, the Big Cannoli, and Rocky Stucci, the main man, the deface, the meatball, the general in charge, he would be the commander-in-chief of the meatball army. And that'll be just about 2 hours from now, a little less than 2 hours from now. And you can join us where we talk politics and current events and topic-driven material. But I know Rocky was saying something to me about this particular topic. And we have all these different conversations that go on. And now because I rabbit trailed, I lost the point, so I'm just going to move on. And if it comes to me, I'll just jump into it. This is what we dubbed many years ago ADHD radio. Now, I'm very topic-driven and very myopic with this particular radio show, in that I like to dig into history, historical mysteries, biblical mysteries, faith versus science issues, which is what we've been in the middle of, and we're going to be wrapping up tonight. All of those issues I do here. Those are the things that drive me, the things I write about, the things I talk about, all of that. And over on Rocky's show, we get a chance to delve into politics and current events, but even that becomes a little tiring after a while in this political atmosphere. It's like just this morning, I see an article that San Francisco, their city supervisors, now want to deem the NRA a terrorist organization. Things like that drive me insane. What a bunch of nut jobs over there. But that's politics, so I'm not going to talk about it here. We'll talk about that on Rocky's show right after this one. And but we get tired of those things, and we start to delve into the paranormal more, the metaphysical, those kinds of things. Those are things that interest people. Politics, I think, have worn people out over the last few years. And there are reasons for that. We'll probably talk about that on Rocky's show tonight as well. So if you want to get your dose of good politics, and like the tagline we dubbed for our show several years ago, the Situation Room in its earlier incarnation, was we are never smarter than common sense. So we like to approach these things. Yeah, we're conservative for the most part, but we're kind of middle of the road conservative in that we'll delve over to the other side, the dark side, if we need to, if we find that it's common sense and it makes sense. But we pretty much stay in the conservative camp because, no offense to anybody out there, we find the dark side, the liberal side, to be one that lacks in common sense and operates more from an emotional point of view than a factual point of view. So that's always been a problem. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff on this show. I want to close out this little series we've been doing on they didn't teach me that in Sunday school, or I was never taught that in Sunday school. Just kind of looking at science versus religion, skepticism versus religion, and in a very light way and very focused on topics. I'm talking about, some of the stuff I'm talking about on this show, I'm pulling from things I wrote about the reptilian factor when I was researching that, and how faith and science seem to run headlong into each other. They're like two trains on the same set of tracks coming toward each other at full speed. And there's a colliding that goes on between faith and religion. And I don't know why that is. So, but it exists. So, something I want to get into tonight, too. Well, before I get there, I want to tell you where I want to go with this show after this. I have mentioned a couple of topics that I want to get into. I want to talk about this whole Luciferian thing. I know in Sunday school, in church, in religious belief, we are taught that there is the opposite, the dark and the light. Although they don't teach that per se, there is God and then there is the opposition. There is Satan, the devil. All the things the devil made me do it. Satan is the force of evil in the world, and it all started with Lucifer, the fallen archangel. And so I want to look into that a little bit, because the more you research that, the more you find the lines are a little blurred in there. Lucifer and the devil, or Satan, not the same character. Just like Elohim and Jehovah are not the same personage. There are different entities out there, and so the big question when God, in the first of the Ten Commandments, thou shalt obey the Lord thy God, and thou shalt have no other gods before me, says God. And yet it seems to imply that there are other gods that could be put before him. Is this a choice you cognitively make in order to be a follower of Elohim or Jehovah? Of God as we know him, Jesus Christ in Christianity, not as we know him, sorry, I meant as we refer to him. So the big question is, what do you do with passages that seem to comparatively relate names given to Jesus in the New Testament versus names given to Lucifer in the Old Testament? Also, in my research, I found that Satan is the name that was given to the most evilest of devils. Not the same as Lucifer. So I want to dig into some of that stuff. I want to look into it. I want to look also, this is a question that came up this morning, but it's always kind of ranging on the periphery around all these things we talk about, in the church. And by the church, I mean capital T, the church, capital C. That would be the church that was founded, almost 2,000 years ago. How much magic ritual has been adopted by the Christian church? The Christian church seems to be dead set against magics and enchantments and things like that. Yet, if you take any modicum of effort to dig into the background of Christianity and the rituals that you see there, how much of it, from the vestments they wear, from the communion, from the incorporating certain entities into the church, how much of that was appropriated by the church from pagan culture? I do know that there was a great effort in the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages probably, to incorporate pagan symbolism and religious practices into the Christian church in order to draw the pagan crowd in and make them part of the church and control them. And so I want to look into that. I want to dig into that. Magic practices in the Christian church. And if you've got some ideas out there, I know many of you out there. I know Janine, I know Joyce, Jama. A lot of you have given me articles and links of things to look at, books I ought to read. We're going to look into that. I also want to cover the mythic hero element. I want to talk about that. And I know Suze over there in Australia, you have suggested this, and this was something that was on my mind. I've got a book on my shelf by why am I slipping? Joseph Campbell, and on the hero with 1,000 faces. I can't remember the name. Why is it my mind is gone this morning? I don't know. I'm drinking my coffee and trying to get all the vestiges of cobwebs out of my mind for the day, and I seem to slip on some of those names and those titles and things like that. You get me into Egyptian history, I can rattle them off the top of my head. Probably neural net. I've reinforced those for so many years. But the hero with 1,000 faces, the great mythology that is out there. One thing I noticed as an artist and an illustrator on that topic was when I would draw a character that I wanted to be a heroic character. He always tended to look the same. He had the same kind of features about him. This was when I was very big into two big historical mysteries, and that was the Arthurian legends and also the Robin Hood legends. And I dug into those, and I noticed how a lot of illustrations over the centuries, King Arthur, Robin Hood, tended to have the same look about them. There was that heroic. Look at Lord of the Rings when they made the movies, Peter Jackson's movies. You'll notice how Aragorn looks, the heroic king. And he's got, the little longer hair. He's got the beard and the mustache. He's gaunt. The physical appearance. Now compare that to, say, the King Arthur illustrations you've seen, paintings over the years. The Robin Hood paintings. Take a look at even the paintings of Jesus from the Byzantine era and some of those. They all bear that same quality. So what is it about the heroic? Have we put Jesus into that heroic status that he fits into the mold of the great heroic in human history? And so even though it's a religious thing, it's a faith thing, it's a salvific thing, it's a God thing, a divinity thing, yet we still find that when people want to illustrate him, he fits the mold. And so now I'm speaking in very, very overtly general terms about that, but I want to dig into that as a topic, the great heroic, the mythic heroic, and why that exists for us. This delves into things that I talked about in my book on the reptilians. I started writing a book, the secret history of the reptilians. I simply called it the reptilian enigma, and my publisher, New Page Books, they wanted to rename that, and they called it the secret history of the reptilians. And I subtitled it something that's a mouthful, something like the pervasive presence of the serpent in human history, religion, and alien mythos. And so I wanted to explore that. And so all of these things, these are all the things I want to talk about as we get beyond this. But you know what's underlying everything? It's that idea of the stuff we've been covering for the last 6 episodes. And that is this whole idea that this is not what I was taught when I was younger. Be it Sunday school, be it church, be it spirituality, religion, even history. You look at school. Here's something that drives me insane to a certain degree. And that is this whole idea that in school, I've got a good friend of mine that his son brought home something they were studying. Oh my God. Who's the guy who is credited with inventing electricity, the light bulb, and all? Edison. They were studying Thomas Edison, but there was no mention of Tesla. There was no mention that All Edison was a capitalist. Nothing wrong with that. But he was the guy that would shut down opposition. He would buy up ideas. He would claim them as his own. Yeah, he was a scientist. He did his own things. He had staffs of people that he paid to do these things. R&D in its day. But my friend questioned the school, and he said, why are you not teaching about Tesla? And why are you not teaching the real history of Thomas Edison? He was a capitalist who would shut people down, buy up their ideas in order to make money off of them. Now, like I say, if you're going to make money, no, all power to you. But there is a certain degree where, level where you reach crossing certain lines when you shut people down. We've heard of the oil industry shutting down, buying up for millions of dollars from private, not investigators, inventors. They would buy up their ideas so they could shelve them because they would hurt the oil industry because it developed a new source of power. So all of this kind of stuff is in there. So what I'm saying is these are all topics I'm going to be digging into in the near future. Maybe even tomorrow we'll start one of these. But underneath it all is this whole idea that the things that we're taught, be it, again, religion, be it spirituality, be it history, be it politics, all of these things are not always what they seem to be. They are what the people writing them want you to know. So how can we dig below the surface, get beyond and find better answers for these things? That's what I want to continue doing now. And hopefully in just describing what we want to get into, you get the idea that there is more there, that there is something efficacious to pull from even saying these are the things we're going to be talking about, and talking about them just for brief seconds and moments here to give you an idea where we're going. You get the idea. And so I'm going to even put it out to you. If there's anybody who's got something that you'd like to see me address on this show that I've not mentioned, or if you've got something that will illuminate a topic a little better that you think, throw it in there. And I've got tons of links already and books to look at and articles to read and things like that. And I thank you all for putting that in there. But throw them in there. Let's get them again. Do it right now. If you've already done it for me in the past, do it again. Let's put it up there so people can see what these things are about. And we'll take it from there. And I've already talked through most of this first hour. We got about 5 minutes left or thereabouts in this first segment. And then we'll try to wrap up this whole thing. That's not what they taught me in Sunday school. I'm getting bored with the graphics for this show because I'm just using the same graphic and updating it with a newer image about something I might be tackling that day. I want to get into more stuff. So even the graphics are starting to get old for me. This will be the 7th and final episode on that topic. We'll delve into other things. So right now, let's just start hitting it here before we come to the end of this hour already. And we kind of left off with talking about blood is thicker than water, comparative speaking about all these different things about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, how that is. I hope you are beginning to see how that is a symbol, that is a metaphoric symbol in the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And that this story, if I hadn't made it clear already, this story was something that the writer of Genesis borrowed from other cultures. That the Sumerian culture, the Mesopotamian culture, if you look at Sumer and Akkad in the Euphrates, Tigris River valleys, the cradle of civilization, they used to call that, how their stories in cuneiform texts, those were all stories that morphed into the stories that we find in the Old Testament, that 1,500 years later. It was really that migration of people from the Fertile Crescent down into that area that's kind of between Africa, origins down there, and Mesopotamia. You've got what is now Israel, but you've got the Middle East in there. Down south toward the Negev, toward the Sinai. All those cultures had things that they believed that Moses, the writer of the book of Genesis, who I believe was the writer of the book of Genesis, incorporated into what he was building and what he was writing about. Keep in mind, this is a guy, Moses, who would have grown up for 40 years in the royal families of Egypt. And I believe 18th dynasty Egypt. I believe during the Tutmosian dynasty. Tutmosis I would have been on the throne when he was born. Tutmosis II, his wife Hatshepsut, who took over as pharaoh, her stepson from Tutmosis II, Tutmosis III, who she was co-regent with because he was like 3 when Tutmosis II died. Hatshepsut takes over. Tutmosis III comes to the throne. And at the end of his reign, right after he dies, his son, who he had been co-regent with for a couple of years, Amenhotep II, I believe is the pharaoh of the Exodus. These are the guys that Moses would have encountered. And who he would have encountered. Rechmir, the great Rechmir, the Grand Vizier of Egypt. I believe Moses was a Grand Vizier during his first 40 years. Well, not the whole 40 years, but as he became an adult. With this guy over my shoulder, Senenmut. So all of this stuff, I think this is the guy who wrote the book of Genesis, who codified the Jewish religion. And the things that he would have learned, that he would have brought to the table, are things that incorporated what he learned in Egypt, in the school of the nobles, what he learned as a Grand Vizier to Hatshepsut, Grand Vizier one step off the throne. He would have incorporated the religions he knew of the day. Remember that when he fled Egypt, it said he was 40 years in Midian, which is somewhere out in God-forsaken Sinai, which is God-forsaken to begin with. And out in the wilderness out there, with a culture that had their own set of religions. Remember, Moses married the daughter of the high priest of Midian. That was not Judaism. That was not Judaic religion at all. That was pagan religion by definition. But he married the guy's daughter, Zipporah. And he brought all of this stuff that he learned that first 40 to 80 years of his life, and then wrote the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, wrote Genesis. And so you're seeing that all of this stuff that's out there that we were taught from the Old Testament is really incorporation of other religions, a bringing in of all that stuff and creating something new, Judaism, out of whole cloth. They had a certain way they worshiped. Why do you think that they kept falling back to the pagan ways of worship? Why do you think after seeing, if these events were true, and they're not, overemphasized is not the term, exaggerated in the book of Exodus, you look at just prior to the Exodus, you have all these plagues that took place, these miraculous negative workings of God to get Pharaoh to let the people go. Look at all the lives that were lost, all the livestock wasted, all the land devastated, all the people who died as a result of God attempting to harden the heart of Pharaoh and to make Pharaoh eventually let them all go. And so all of this, you imagine being one of those people, the common people, the slaves, the Israelites. You see all of this stuff happening in front of your eyes. You go to the Red Sea crossing, where the Bible says the sea split open and the people crossed on dry ground. Then they watched it close and engulf the armies of Pharaoh. Obviously an exaggeration, unless, like some good fantasy or science fiction movie, this stuff was true and it actually happened the way it's written down. What you've got is this, and I've described this before, where there's a natural event. The wind blows off the Negev and dries off the bitter lakes, the Sea of Reeds up to the north, the wetlands up in the north of the Red Sea. That this is more than likely where the crossing took place. So if these things all took place, imagine just a few weeks later, all these people, after seeing all these glorious, miraculous events, they're at what the Bible calls Mount Sinai, and I believe it was at Serabit el-Khadim in the Sinai. They're down on the desert floor. They're all encamped there. Moses has gone up to the top of the mountain, and he's gone for 40 days. And somewhere along the way, the people went to his brother Aaron and said, "Where's this guy? Where's Moses?" That's it in the vernacular. And, in the Bible it says, "And where is this man Moses? He has gone up into the mount." Really, if you read that in the vernacular, it's, where's this guy? This guy, the leader. He's gone. Where'd he go? Is he dead? I surmise that he was up on the top of Serebet el-Khadim, visiting with the caste of priests that lived there at the temples of Ptah and Hathor. So what happens? The people, after seeing all these miraculous events, what do they ask for? They say, "Build us a god. Make us a god that we can worship." And out comes the golden calf. Now, the golden calf, I believe, is an image of Hathor, the calf goddess, the cow goddess of Egypt, bringer of prosperity and fertility. By the way, Serebet el-Khadim was her mountain. Her temple was at the top. She was the patron goddess of the miners in that area that were mining for turquoise and copper. And this is the mountain where they're. So why would these people, after seeing all these glorious deeds of God, a few weeks later say, "Build us a god so we have him"? Did they not happen the way we were told, the way it's written? Or did that happen, or did any of it happen the way it's written? Why would these people drift so far, so quickly? Maybe it's because the things didn't happen the way we were taught they happened. And they kept falling back to what they previously believed, to what they held to be true. And I know there was a division of the people there. Those who are on Jehovah's side stand here, or Elohim. And those who are on the side of the pagan gods stand there, and the earth split open and swallowed all the bad guys. There was another scene where all the Levites, the tribe of Levi, went about and with the sword killed everybody who was not a follower of Elohim, of the religion that Moses was setting up. So there's a lot of devastating bloodletting at that time. We're going to get into that more, but you look at that, and you have to start asking the questions. What really happened here? What is this all about? What's the cover story all about? What are the events that took place if they look anything like this? Was Moses a freedom fighter in Egypt? Did he come back and lead a revolt against the Pharaoh? And that was the cover story was the 10 plagues. What happened? What actually happened there? We got to ask these questions, and we need to keep asking them. To believe them just by faith, to swallow it hook, line, and sinker, means I'm not going to think about what it is I believe. And so I challenge you to do that. Now, when we get into the second segment, we're going to wrap up this whole thing. That's not what I learned in Sunday school, or not what I was taught in Sunday school. So you sit right there. We're going to be gone for 2 minutes. We'll be right back. Hang tight. All right, folks, thank you for coming back. We're back from break. You're listening to me, Scotty Roberts, right here on the Intrepid radio program on the Odyssey Radio Network, Odyssey1.com. Odyssey spelled Odysy 1.com. You can go there and listen to the show, or if you're lucky enough to listen to where the terrestrial stations are airing this episode, you can find us there. You can go over to Odyssey1.com and find a network there of where to listen. If you want to join us for the video broadcast, the simulcast, that sounds so grandiose, the simulcast of this show in video with the live chat room, you can go over to my YouTube channel right now and click into youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Mr. spelled out, Scotty with a Y. Scotty with an I-E is a girl's name, so I'm Scotty with a Y. I'm Scotty. Hey, laddie. All right, let's get back into this. The next thing I wanted to talk about, which kind of wraps this up, in my own writings here that I'm referring to, when you see me looking down, I'm looking to things that I've written about this and some of my notes that I've made along the way. And I've got in here, where's the beef in all of this when we're examining this? And remember, when I wrote this stuff we've been talking about for 6 days, I was really focused on looking at the reptilian issue. And is it real? Is it this big mystical ancient aliens type of thing? Is it just that every culture seemed to have reptilians, serpents, snakes that were involved with them? And we looked into the comparatives last night. And so this really, I dug into this deeply, this issue of what is it we believe? What does our faith tell us? And so after all of this stuff, you have to ask, what's the connection here? What's the connection to, well, either reptilians or any kind of other belief that we tend to hold to, or fanciful belief that we tend to hold to? What's the connection to what was really happening? Is there a connection? Are we divided by... Divided's not the word. I'm thinking, let me backtrack that. Are we separating ourselves, or as Jeffrey Doherty, the Christian whistleblower, would say, unindoctrinating ourselves from the things that we were taught? I hate to use his words and his thunder, but I think he'd be happy with that. Jeff is a dear friend, love him deeply, and I love his way of thinking. Don't agree with him on everything, but I love the things he's brought up, and he has really put into the common language of today when we're talking about these and thinking about them and questioning them and using our critical thinking, the idea of unindoctrinating ourselves from the things that we were told were so. So what comes to your mind? It's clear that while most of our familiar biblical stories have this connectivity with ancient religions, as I described in the first segment, Moses drew a lot of stuff from other comparative religions, tied them all in to what he wanted to say and what he wanted Judaism to be. It's also clear that there's symbolism that carries from one to the other. It's some of the stuff, something that comes to my mind is like, you look at some of the big cathedrals, like in France, Rennes-le-Château. You look at some of the other cathedrals and chapels that were built 1,000, 1,500 years ago. They incorporate iconography that is carved into the walls, into the pillars, into things, paintings. Some of these things, one of the most familiar that comes to my mind is like the Green Man. You've seen pictures of the Green Man, a pagan symbol. That this is tied into carvings you'll see in these cathedrals and these chapels. Why would they incorporate that iconography in there? There is similar iconography brought in. They were drawing in the pagan crowds, so to speak, at the time. And now, it's my contention, my secularized contention, anthropologically speaking, my opinion is that the Hebrew religion, which birthed Christianity, Christianity being just a sect of Judaism that accepted that the Messiah had come rather than still waiting for him, has its roots in a language and characters that are modified from more ancient religions. It carries over symbolism and adapted meanings. There's the importance of drawing the comparisons between the ancient Sumerian culture and the ancient Hebrew scriptural accounts is kind of superficial at best, for there's literally tome-filled libraries that speak to these matters. I'd love to see the Vatican Library. I wouldn't even know what to start looking for. Could you imagine being given free reign in the Vatican libraries to see what they've got locked up in there? That'd be of course, you'd have to know Latin, you'd have to know Hebrew, you'd have to know Greek, you'd have to know probably Italian and other languages to find anything that's worthwhile in there for your studies in it. But imagine, I get this picture of, if you remember again the movie Lord of the Rings, where you've got Gandalf, who goes to the old libraries to dig out the old information. And he's sitting in a room, he's surrounded by scrolls and crumbling documents. And he's digging for stuff. Now, I think the Vatican probably keeps a little better care than they would have in those times that story represents. But imagine sitting there and going through the stuff, trying to dig something out. It speaks to the foundational concepts that flow throughout the religious mythologies that have given us the foundations of what we believe. We believe things based on things that we've experienced as humanity, and somebody has codified that along the way. The bigger question to ask is whether we put our faith in something that we hold to be truth, with a capital T, when in fact it's nothing more than accumulated myth upon myth upon myth upon myth. Legend. We say historical events turn into stories, turn into legends, eventually become mythologies. And imagine all the things that are added. You take a look at somebody like William Wallace in Scotland, Braveheart, Alba Gabra. You see Mel Gibson's movie, of course, obviously brought that into the forefront of most people's minds. And that's what we think of William Wallace until you study who he was. He wasn't a kilt-wearing poor Scotsman that raised a rebellion. He was a knight. He dressed like a knight of his day, with armor and the helms. And by knight, I don't mean, your knights in shining armor. I mean, we're talking back in, the early 1200s. Was it early 12 or early 1300s? Early 1200s, I do believe. And you're looking at, early 1300s. You're looking at somebody who has been changed and altered over history because the stories become more fanciful. You have to tell stories. What did he say? Even in the movie, which is a huge adulteration of the actual historical story, somebody said, "Aren't you William Wallace? I thought you were taller." And he said, "Yeah." And he says, "And I have fire bolts shoot from my eyes and lightning shoots out of my arse," or something like that. The stories, even in their time, were built on. I look into the Robin Hood legends, which, again, like I mentioned in the first segment, is something I want to talk about. This kind of mythology, the heroic mythology that we have. Robin Hood, you try searching for the origins of Robin Hood, and you can go back as far as, I think it's the late 1100s. You see these stories of Robin Hood. You see name places that date back to that time. Robin Hood's Well, which is still there. I was driving down I think it's the A1, main highway, going up through the north of England and around Leeds and Lancaster. Not Lancaster, Leeds and Barnsdale and those areas. North of Nottingham. And you'll start to see name places. And I was driving, it's like when you're driving and you see a clover leaf on the freeway to turn off. It would be like in the middle of a clover leaf was sitting this old well. And there was no big fanfare around it, no fences or gates, just an old white stone well. And there was a little placard on it or near it that said, "This is Robin Hood's Well." This is the place along the old North Highway, the King's Highway, when it was all dirt, back 1,000 years ago, where they would stop to get water. This name place bore the name Robin Hood's Well since the 1200s, I think it was. And so when you start seeing name places that were named after characters that we see in our legends and our mythologies and our storybooks, a name place doesn't usually gain somebody's name attached to it right away. It takes time. So Robin Hood is an older legend. It goes back a little further. And so you find streets in towns that were once Robin Hood's Way, things like that, avenues. And so the same thing with all of this stuff. Finding the truth of who Robin Hood is as difficult as finding the truth to where our religions gained their meat. Where's the beef, so to speak, in all this? It's accumulated after time, myth upon myth, legend upon legend. And so how do you know what to believe? I know by faith in the Christian church, the evangelical church, where I was in Bible college and seminary and youth ministry and all these things I was deeply embedded into for many years of my life, that I believed all of these things, not because I could prove them, but because I chose to believe them by faith. That, wow, if this story has questions, well, there's going to be questions, there's going to be doubts, but you know what? I believe that God is big enough and strong enough and omnipotent enough to maintain the integrity of his written word down through the ages. And that's the way we justified our way through some of the textual criticisms, through some of the problems that we found in the stories. And we very easily brushed them all off, saying, I can brush that off because, you know what? God has the power to maintain it. So whatever the questions, there's an answer somewhere. We'll just have to find it someday. And so we believed it by faith. Now, before you go kind of clucking your tongue in disgust at this, I have to again state emphatically that faith is a completely separate matter from fact and truth. It doesn't have to be factual or truthful to put my faith in something. If I want to believe a belief system set up around that, the things I was taught in Sunday school, I know a lot of people who still believe that exactly as it was taught. Now, maybe some of those things are so. Maybe I'm all washed up. Maybe all of us that try to think beyond that are in the wrong, and that it is exactly what we were taught, exactly what was written. But I tend to think it's not. There's more to it, and we've seen this just in the story of Adam and Eve. How even the story, the account itself, reads like a mythological tale. So faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's what Paul wrote in the New Testament. Think of that for a second. The substance of things hoped for. It's the substance of those things. It's the evidence of things we can't see. It's like that song, and I think I quoted it on here, or at least I quoted it to somebody at Odyssey Radio, to Russ. And I said to him, there was a song by Michael Card, who was one of my favorite songwriters when I was in youth ministry. I loved his songs because he thought through things. He had a song that was called Scandalon, which is a Greek word, the scandal of believing in the Christ, of believing that Christ, the scandal of believing in something that just didn't seem so. That song, I'm trying to think of the lyrics of this. This is a different one. This is how he wrote. He wrote, it seems I've imagined him all of my life as the wisest of all of mankind. But if God's holy wisdom is foolish to men, he must have seemed out of his mind. For even his family said he was mad, and the priests said a demon's to blame. But God, in the form of this angry young man, could not have seemed perfectly sane. When we in our foolishness thought we were wise, he played the fool and opened our eyes. When we in our foolishness thought we were strong, he became helpless to show we were wrong. And so we follow God's own fool, for only the foolish can tell. Believe the unbelievable, and come be a fool as well. And it goes on to say, so surrender your life to the carpenter's son, to a madman who died for a dream. Then you'll have the faith his first followers had, and you'll feel the weight of the beam. Surrender the hunger to say you must know, and have the courage to say I believe, for the power of paradox opens your eyes and blinds those who say they can see. And then it goes into that refrain, for when we in our foolishness thought we were wise, he played the fool and opened our eyes. So surrender, and so come lose your life to the carpenter's son. These were the things we were taught. These are the things that still pull on some of my heartstrings. And I say, but can I live my life where according to that faith, my eternal destiny is in the balance? But I have to believe it by faith alone. It says, don't know, believe. I even wrote about that in my book, The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare, where Tam, the main character, has to pass over into the fairy realm, Tirnanog, to find a little lost girl who'd been stolen by the Fae. And he has this old mystic that on the shores of Loch Tay in Scotland, they're standing before, like a manentole. It's a big standing stone, think of Stonehenge, only with a big hole that was born out of the middle. And he said, pass yourself 3 times through the hole in the stone, and you'll emerge in Tirnanog. And there was incantations and so on. And Tam said, I don't understand. And the old mystic said, don't understand, believe. And so there are things that we obviously put our faith in. Even in this chat room, even with those of you out there that we question these things, and we try to go through critical thinking and this process of trying to understand what it is we want to believe, what it is we choose to believe. Do we put our faith in faith, or do we put our faith in something solid that has evidence to it? Not evidence of things unseen, not the substance of things we hope are there, but evidence and fact and real things. We want that for our lives. We don't live our lives and pay our bills and go to work on the faith of somebody or faith in something. We may have faith in the system that it's going to work, but that's off to the side. We don't even think about it. We don't incorporate that. We just do things. We have contracts. We have all of these things that we do in life, but we don't do it when it comes to faith. And we're built up by, we choose to believe. We push away the need to know, and we trust in something. We do that, and one of the problems I've had is that when I started pushing away from Christianity and living my life that way, I wanted to know things. As I did that, some of the things I ended up accepting in the metaphysical realm, in the mystical realm, and so on. Not all of these things have proof either. And so I found sometimes I was just replacing my faith from one thing to another thing, and it bothered me because I thought I'm not really I'm not really living by this need to know and facts. I want to dig deeper. Maybe they both work at the same time is the big question I had to ask myself. And so if you're willing to step outside the box, that box where faith is the adhesive that binds together the things that don't always make sense. If you're willing to step outside that box, you're suddenly in this limbo. You're set adrift. Maybe some will say you're setting yourself free, but in a sense what you've done is you've set yourself adrift because you don't have those moorings anymore and you want to start questioning those things. But if you set yourself, you're willing to step outside the box, if only for a little bit, in order to look back in and ask yourself some serious questions, you may just find that there are other things beyond the scope of religious dogma, beyond the scope of systematic theologies. You may even step back into the box later on. Say, okay, I've had enough of that. I'm good. I'm going to go back in there. But you might have gained a stronger sense of what you believe. For it's like with muscle, the repeated tearing down of muscle is that thing that builds its strength. But at the same time, I'm an awful lot like Richard Feynman, and I read a long quote of his, I think in the first or second segment of this little series. And this is really where I am. I tend to doubt. And doubting makes me question. My questioning, it's symbiotic. My questioning makes me doubt. But when I do those things, I find that it pushes me sometimes further away from the ability to believe because my doubt takes over. And I'm not talking about doubt like, oh, should I do this? Should I do that? I'm not talking about, whimsical doubt. I'm talking about doubting on a deeper level. I doubt these things. I ask questions because I doubt, because I'm skeptical. And Richard Feynman said, and I'm going to repeat this quote to kind of come to wrapping up this little series. I don't know how much time I have left. I haven't been paying attention to the clock. I think just a few minutes left. But he said, if you expected science to give all the answers to all the wonderful questions about what we are, where we're going, what the meaning of the universe is, and so on, then I think you could easily become disillusioned. And in that disillusionment, look for some mystic answer to the problems. And by the way, don't we all do that? We push for the answers, and sometimes we settle for the mystic answer that appeals to us the most. How a scientist, he goes on, can take a mystic answer, I don't know. Because the whole spirit is to understand. And then he goes on, he says, well, never mind that anyway. I don't understand that. He says, but anyhow, his words, but anyhow, if you think of it though, at least the way I think of what we're doing is, we're exploring. We're trying to find out as much as we can about the world, and I would add about the universe. We want to know things. We want to explore them. He says, people say to me, are you looking for the ultimate answer, the ultimate laws of physics? And he says, no, I'm not. I'm just looking to find out more about the world. And if it turns out that there's a simple, ultimate law that explains everything, so be it. That would be the ultimate law, wouldn't it? That would be a very nice discovery, he says. If it turned out that it's like an onion with millions of layers, and we're just sick and tired of looking at the layers, then maybe that's the way it is. But whatever way it comes out, it's nature. It's there. And she's going to come out the way she is. And therefore, when we go to investigate, we shouldn't pre-decide what it is we're trying to do, except to find out more about it. Now, we've heard this whole notion of you're falling back upon your preconceived notions, we will tell people. We can't do that. We should look to see what's true, Feynman says, and what may not be true. And once you start doubting, which